I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: what does the fake Star Wars Russian bot study prove? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because if you've been living under a rock and haven't heard about this, there was a new study, quote unquote, and those are very large quotation marks I'm using there because this study is anything but a study, that was published late last week, or it hit the media late last week, and the claim from this guy Moreton Bay, who's responsible for this study, is that the Star Wars fan base was infiltrated by Russian trolls and bots and political operatives and activists, and that's why we saw the negative backlash that we did over the whole Last Jedi incident. Now, here's the deal. I'm not going to relitigate the flaws. I spent more than 3 hours last week when I first heard about this study, quote unquote. I spent 3 hours poring over the study, looking at the methodology, looking at the data, looking at the claims that were made, and I've made a lengthy analysis of all the flaws that I found and that I saw in there, and why this is just so absurd to make the claims that he's trying to make here, and why this study is just anything but a study. And you can find out more by watching that video. I'll post a link in the video description below, so I'm not going to relitigate that. There's almost an hour of content in that video which explores that in detail. But here's what you need to know. Here are the Reader's Digest takeaway bullet points that you need to know about the flaws here in this particular study, quote unquote. He found that 5% of the tweets tweeted at Rian Johnson were bots, when in actual fact, according to much more robust academic research, the Twitter average for bots is as high as 15%. So in other words, that's important because what he found was that there were less bots tweeting at Rian Johnson than the actual Twitter averages. And yet he made this big claim that this was sort of some sort of infiltration by bots. Secondly, a total number of 1.7% of all the tweets that were tweeted at Rian Johnson were supposedly from Russian trolls. That is hardly a Russian invasion of Star Wars. And secondly, I say supposedly because, as his own study points out, he has absolutely no way of knowing for certain where these supposed tweeters are coming from. They could be coming from anywhere in the world. So there's no way to even verify that claim that they're Russians is even accurate. But even if we take it as accurate, a grand total of 1.7% of all the tweets were supposedly from Russian trolls. Like I said, that is hardly a Russian invasion of Star Wars. The much bigger problems with the study: it's a very, very, very tiny and selected group of people to study. It's a small sample size, and you can't have reliable conclusions from such a tiny sample size. And of course, an even bigger issue is it's not random. He's selected people tweeting at Rian Johnson. It's a very arbitrary decision to make to target those people. And of course, the fact that he's going after the director is going to skew a lot of the results. It's more likely that you're going to have more positive people on that particular Twitter account because they're going to be probably friends of Rian Johnson initially, or fans of his, and so they're going to react more favourably. So that's going to sort of skew the negative positive results that you find. But also, being a public figure like he is, and a well-known public figure because he directed a Star Wars film, it's quite conceivable that he's going to attract a bit more of the trolling attention perhaps than other people would. But the whole point is it's tiny, it's not a randomised study group. And here's the other big flaw here, is the way in which he labelled people as being political operatives, political activists, having a political agenda. Basically what it did was anyone who tweeted negatively about Star Wars and who tweeted about their displeasure about the politics found within Star Wars, which, he acknowledges there was more of a focus on those politics. And then anybody who tweeted about their displeasure about those politics, and then when he looked at their Twitter account, they tweeted a lot about politics, he said that person was a political activist. That's how he categorised people as political activists. That is not what makes you a political activist. That's just absurd. So basically, those are the takeaway points. The study is flawed. But here's the thing. Despite that, this study has been, and it still is being, republished and touted and talked about and breathlessly screamed from the rooftops of all sorts of media outlets and news and commentary websites. That's proof, it's definitive proof that the Russians have attacked Star Wars now as well. What does this prove? Well, number one, it shows us that once again, media trustworthiness is at an all-time low. Because clearly, if these journalists and commentators had actually bothered to look at the study and examine what was being said and the data that was being put forward and the way that he went about things, they would clearly see that this story fails the sniff test for truthfulness. It just shouldn't have been republished, or if it was published and talked about, there should have been a very strong critique of the major flaws in it. But none of that happened. Instead, we're seeing headline after headline, study finds that 50% of negative backlash was Russian agents and bots. It's unbelievable, because in actual fact, that's not what the study found at all. So again, it shows you that media trustworthiness, you just can't trust a lot of media outlets these days. Secondly, it also shows now that within academia, there is more of a problem now with trustworthiness around research claims that are being made. Now, academia has always had its bad eggs, its bad apples who sort of sat around the fringes as bad actors looking for opportunities to promote their various ideologies and to cook the books a little bit to try and get away with it. But now it seems that this is becoming more and more of a problem. In fact, interestingly, and perhaps a little bit ironically, I don't know, or perhaps there's a bit of justice in this, but at the same time last week we had this fake study being put out making claims about Russian and political operatives interfering with Star Wars. We had another group of people who had managed to, they'd made news because of the fact that they had managed to get a series of fake studies published in various academic journals, and including peer-reviewed studies that were total fakes. So, for example, they took 3,000 words out of Hitler's Mein Kampf and they reworded those 3,000 words into the language of intersectionality theory, and that was peer-reviewed and published in an academic journal. And they're referring to these things as what they call grievance studies, like the industry of grievance studies, where these politically motivated grievance studies, and how susceptible to this kind of dishonesty and manipulation, and how unreliable they are. And when you look at the Star Wars study, quote unquote, this is definitely, I would say, a grievance study. It's politically motivated. It's got a political agenda. It's very much in that category of being a grievance study. And of course, the other thing that this breathlessly repeated claim that the Russians and the bots and the political operatives have invaded the Star Wars fandom is really showing is that those people who are now dedicated diehard apologists for this new politicization of Star Wars, this new ideological imposition upon Star Wars, that they are willing to say anything at all instead of actually accepting what is blatantly, obviously going on here. A bad movie was made and it went over badly with the fan base. But instead of accepting that fact, no, the Russians are coming. It's like, drunk old Uncle Harry at the Christmas party. The Russians are coming. I say, it wasn't my fault I crashed your auntie's car. It was the Chinese. They made me do it. It's the spies. They rigged the brakes. And they made me, with the special memory juice, made me forget how to drive. I drink, it's in the gin. I drink lots of gin. And then the gin, because it's been spiked by the Chinese and the Russians and the Japanese, because, we fought a war against them, it makes me forget how to drive. It's a trick of the enemy. Right? That's what this sounds like. It's just that level of absurdity. So the moral of the story is, don't believe the headline. Don't believe the headline. Actually research and do a bit more investigation for yourself. Check multiple sources with media headlines, but even that today is not necessarily always a reliable thing. I've got another video coming up about why that is soon. But I would say dig into the actual details about what's been claimed, and particularly if it's a study like this. Like, if you're someone who's a diehard believer in the awesomeness of the new politicized Star Wars, effectively, this study is too good to be true. It is a gift from the gods, and anything that is too good to be true usually is. So what you are, it's in your best interest to actually explore and unpack and dig a little deeper and find out whether the claims that are being made really are truthful. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you next week on The Daily Question.